Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast with myself, Joe LaVacca, and Joe Gambino. In today's episode, Joe and I wrap up our conversation around plantar fasciitis for now. We go into a conversation that centers around strength testing, establishing normative data, and sharing a lot more of our viewpoints about treatment and managing pain with plantar fasciitis clients. We hope you enjoy this episode and all future episodes of the Beyond Pain podcast. And if you do, please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share all those wonderful things you can do on social media to help us let the podcast grow. Without further ado, here's today's episode.
Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe. But we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense. Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Joe Gambino, and I'm here with your other co-host, Joe LaVacca, looking stunning as always, very swag with the backwards hats.
It just worked out. I was trying to keep it real for anybody watching on YouTube. I didn't want to show up.
You are looking a little swole. Just, I only see the traps up, but very nice.
It's all you need to see, baby. It's all you need to see.
Perfect. Our IG handles, please DM us. You can DM us the word podcast, and we'd be more than happy to open a conversation to talk about whatever you want. My handle, at Joe Gambino DPT. LaVacca's is at strength and motion _PT, and you can always just generally reach out to us and check out the podcast dedicated to the show at Beyond Pain Podcast on Instagram. There is an application form with all the links in the show notes, so you can go down there if you want to work with us, fill out that application, reach out to us. Our links are there for Family Cast, easy for you to reach out. And we're also on YouTube. You can watch the show there, Cups of Joe _PT. I think we're now up to 7 subscribers, Joe, so we're moving on up in the world.
Boom. Double digits soon. I'm feeling it.
Yes. And most people are still consuming through Apple Podcasts after I was looking at a little bit of the data. Well, please, on that note, if you are listening and enjoying the show, please drop us a review. There's another way to do so. It'd be very, very beneficial to just continue to help the podcast get out in front of more listeners, especially if you're finding it beneficial to just kind of almost pass the baton, so to speak, to help somebody out here in the future. And I want to start here, Joe, because there's a couple of changes from my perspective on coffee. It says somehow we do, and I bring up somehow we have a coffee team on this podcast. Well, maybe I don't know if you have updates on how you take your coffee or how you're consuming your coffee. Why don't we just say, why don't you throw an update in life in general, something you learned or something like that, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Update on life. Let's see. I'm out in Colorado. We're heading off to a wedding. Not myself or Cordy's wedding, but one of her coworkers. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be up in Steamboat Springs. If you've ever been to Colorado, I'm excited to get back up there. It's kind of beautiful. Lots of good hikes. Lots of nice open water areas and lakes, and I guess the hot springs. I'm so interested about hot springs and how they actually exist and how they're like just so freaking awesome, where you're just like in the middle of the wilderness and you're in like a hot tub, like just nature's hot tub. I think that's still like one of the coolest things to me. Let's see, what did I learn this week? I've been learning a whole bunch. I mean, I read so much. I think I got one. I'm reading this book, Super Communicators, now, and I really liked this idea of speaking to people using the same language. And usually when you're breaking down in communication, it's just because you're speaking different languages. So in one of the first few chapters of the book, Charles Duhigg, who is one of my favorite authors, talked about knowing when people need to be heard, hugged, or helped. And when they need to be heard, they just are sort of seeking connection or maybe relationship, trying to find their identity. When they need to be helped, they're trying to figure out a problem and they need your expertise on that problem. And when they need to be hugged, it might just be emotional ideas or concepts that if you're not equipped to handle those, then just keep your mouth shut and keep listening, or as Joe put it, pass the baton to someone else. So I've really just even been taking that into conversations with clients this week, right? And trying to figure out, do they need to be hugged, helped, or heard? And I feel like it's been a nice blend, but even just me pausing on that has made my sessions go a little bit easier. But I don't have any update on coffee, so I'm really excited to hear what's happening for you and what this big transition is. I'm almost worried because then I'm going to have to do something like big and meaningful.
I'd say it's a huge transition, but I have, I've always been a cappuccino guy or an iced coffee guy, and I don't know what made me decide to do an iced latte, but I've actually been quite enjoying them. So now I'm leading in that. But more importantly, after hearing Tyler and Stella talk about these espresso machines in their homes.
Oh no, I ended
up getting one, but
wow,
I don't know how, or I mean, I felt, like Stella was like, look, right, he was a gifted one, right? That's
very nice one.
That would be fantastic. Yes. Well, I found one. Jan sent me a message on my Facebook Marketplace one. And it's literally like the person had it for like 3 months and decided to sell it. And it's like, it's sold it for $600. And I was like, I didn't really want to get one at this point. But I was like, I have to kind of get it at this point because it's so cheap. So now it's sitting in our kitchen and I am dying to get to use it. And we'll get some espresso beans now. And I need to finish cleaning it out. So that was exciting.
I'm excited for you. That might have even accelerated. That might have accelerated my trip out to North Carolina.
Well, I was going to say,
we got a couple of live sessions going, but the best espresso martinis, which I don't know if you and Jen are espresso martini lovers, all require fresh espresso. And that is, to me, the secret ingredient. I don't care what vodka you're using. I don't care what Kahlua or like how much Kahlua you put in. I don't care if you use Bailey's or not, whatever. But the secret is fresh espresso. And because I have not taken the leap, I don't make great espresso martinis for myself or others, but it is what it is. So now I'm excited to come to North Carolina, not only have fresh espresso in the morning with the Gambino family, but also then
go down, you're going to make us espresso martinis. You're going to enjoy them, Jim. Will unfortunately not be able to enjoy them at this point.
Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting.
Yes, but after maybe Tuesday and then that, she'll be able to enjoy. Well, maybe you teach me your secret and I'll make it for her.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, come down to somewhere else. All right, my friend. Oh, I was going to say something else. I was going to talk about a book, but I want to get 7 minutes into this podcast. I'll bring it up next time. I'm actually reading a finance book, and we'll talk about it a little bit maybe next time because he actually brings up a whole lot of fitness and correlations, which I think is interesting. Cool. And I do feel like there are carryovers between the two worlds, as far as like making decisions and sticking to a plan, and even like compound interest and how we make tissue adaptations. Right, I see these parallels here, so we will talk a little about that next time. But today we're kind of building off our last conversation, talking about fasciitis, and just kind of talking more about building a strong, resilient foot. So I'll let you kind of start off here, and let's just talk everything in generalities. I mean, we obviously know that you can't just simply advise if you don't assess them. You don't know what's kind of going on because, you can try something, right? And there's almost a 50-50 chance, right? So it can help them or it's going to make it worse, or maybe we call it 33%, because then also something can just not happen, or it can just happen, has no benefit. So it is in general, when you're thinking with thought process on how you look at the foot, the ankle, and maybe in the whole chain, how it all relates. What kind of general concepts do you kind of fall into or look for your assessings?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how much I dove into this in the previous podcast episode, but I think for me, it really all comes down to initially starting the process with, can people make shapes? I want to see your foot be able to make an arch. I want to see it be able to flatten. I want to see your toe be able to extend and flex. I think both motions are important because it's a joint. And we know that healthy joints are maintained by maintaining full range of motion. So to me, the big toe and the little toes, that means flexion and extension, not just extension, right? I wouldn't just move my knee or my elbow or one joint in one particular direction and to sort of quote unquote keep it healthy. So I don't think the toes fall into that premise either. And, kind of then moving up the chain, I'll probably just keep it fairly simple into the big toe shapes and the little toe shapes. Can that foot make an arch and kind of collapse from that arch position, or for pronation and supination? And then I'm going to probably just head on up towards the tibia and, just sort of see what shapes the tibia is making. So can that tibia actually come over into dorsiflexion? Can it do so separate from the foot? Right. So I do want to be able to see the foot still make, shapes while the tibia is moving. I don't want them to do necessarily be stuck all together. And then I'd probably say the only other one that I'll look at is like that tibial rotation, which to me is kind of correlated. I mean, not maybe causative, but correlated definitely to the amount of pronation and supination people have at the foot. So when I'm seeing a loss of one of those motions, and typically internal rotation, or when the lower leg goes in, that's going to be coupled with the foot, flattening. And when the external rotation of the tibia, the lower leg kind of rolling out, that's going to be more associated with our supination or locking of the foot. So I do kind of just like to just generally assess those things. When it comes to the whole chain, I think that's where it gets a little bit more, in my opinion, speculative, where we're trying to jump around and make all these different connections. And I think I referenced this before, but I think it was Diego Hidalgo and I got Stuart Oliver. Is his name Stuart Oliver? I have to go to double check now. I'll double check that when you're chatting. But they had a great article that came out a few months ago called Anatomical Possibilism, where a lot of our professions are kind of creating these false narratives just because quote unquote fascia connects everything in the body, and you can make all these highway systems and things like that. And yeah, I think it could be a fun way to treat, but I think for me, I always want to look at fundamentals first. And that's probably a big U-turn from clinical practice, where I started trying to get good at the fundamentals, then I ran away from them, and then I ran so far away. I'm thinking about like people's scapular position with their plantar fasciitis, just because, hey, look, your posture's off, and then realizing that after a few years, coming back to the basics was always going to serve me the best anyway. So I would say that's kind of like my simple assessment, on top of ruling out maybe some of those ideas of like stress fracture, bony injury, fat pad injury, and I think we covered that in the last episode. I'd say that's really the simplest part of it. But I mean, what about you? Where are you going with that? Will you go up the chain with your virtual sessions? Will you look at like a lot of these full body movements?
Well, in general, when I work with somebody, because I'm not married to being insurance, right? And it's in a network environment, I look at everything holistically regardless. So having, foot issues, and we're moving into strength training plus, all the stuff they need to kind of bring themselves out of pain, right? I look at everything, look at general patterns and see how things go, right? Because, if we're all working on foot and ankle issues, and most people also have other areas that bother them at the same time, and then if we're also talking about integrated exercise, we want to make sure everything's kind of moving well, or I don't want to be caught by surprise, so to speak, as we're kind of like, oh, I'm doing overhead pressing here, but then we find out that they're missing shoulder flexion and they have shoulder issues, right? I don't want stuff like that. So I do look at everything holistically, but if I'm kind of diving deep into an area, I completely agree with you, right? It's like, how well can, do they have, foot intrinsic muscle strength, right? So we're talking about being able to pronate and supinate and move the toes, with full range of motion, being able to abut the toe. And that's kind of like a big one that many people overlook, where we just like flexion and extension, right? Get that big toe to come out. There's another one, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. I mean, I think everyone overlooks plantar flexion mobility in general, but like does the foot actually have the ability to move in all directions that we want? We do it for every other body part of the shoulder except for the foot and except for the spine. I feel like those are like the two exceptions for most people. Like they're not actual joints that have actual muscles attached to them. Like so they should be treated differently. So yeah, I agree. You know, I'll look around. I'll look at the rotation. I think that's an important component because I mean the tibia and the foot they are highly blended together, and you can't have one without the other in a sense. For the ankle joint to work. So I think you nailed it there. And then I think the other thing is just making sure that everything's kind of strong around the leg. Can you actually do heel raises without the compensation into full range of motion? Can you do one strong, right? And like, what does, I mean, I do look at gait, but I don't necessarily find it overly viable. I feel like people's gaits kind of correct themselves when you just improve range of motion in general and movement quality, that I feel like harping on those kind of movement patterns just kind of almost facilitate a little bit more of like something's always wrong when you step. How many times throughout the day you're constantly walking? So little things like that. So I would say we're very different. I find it is just like how do you start to load that and make sure that you have as much active control as possible. What I would say those in general terms is really shallow. Look at as well.
Yeah. I want to come back to a few things you said, but I do want to correct myself on something I said before. So that article about anatomical possibilism by Diego Hidalgo and Oliver Thompson. And Oliver Thompson is also a great follow on social media. And if you guys haven't heard his podcast, the Words Matter podcast, it's definitely worth a listen to. He hasn't posted something in a long time, but I've been politely messaging him to bring it back. So hopefully we'll see him there. But I do want to come back to this idea that you mentioned with strength. And I think the big thing that clients will come in with all body parts, regardless if it's their back and their foot and they're this, but they have this desire or goal to get stronger. And I've been very intrigued by some of the ongoing conversations around strength as it pertains to the shoulder. And I've even seen a couple of things recently as it pertains to even knee osteoarthritis. And what these kind of studies or conversations are pointing us to is that strength is a very small factor in kind of mediating a lot of these outcomes with pain, to the extent where it was maybe less than like 5%. So people will come in and they want to get stronger at any body part. And I know I'm referencing some shoulder and knee, but then whenever I hear those trends start to emerge, my thought becomes, well, why would that be different at any other body part, right? Because it is so hard to really, I think, assess strength in a given clinic. It's really hard to do it virtually. So I know I'm always trying to come up with clever ways or ideas to measure capacity. And you brought up the heel raise test. So when you're doing the heel raise test with people, do you have a specific number in mind, Mr. Gambino, where you like to see people go?
I do, and I know that there are definitely limitations with it, but I use the usual 20 single leg heel raises with without seeing compensation. And really what I look for is like, do they have the ability to actually, especially in those first few, right, can they get full range of motion through plantar flexion? Because I see often people who really struggle with foot and ankle issues that they can't their heel raises like a quarter of the range of motion that you would expect, right, or half the range of motion you expect. So like, how can you start to drive some of those normal things? I like to see some sort of endurance that it tends to happen with that, whether or not how much that actually correlates to, some of these higher level tasks. But then when I'm looking at like return to activity, right, I just tend to use the activities as the barometers for success, right? So like we're talking about running or we're talking about like walking the golf course, right? Like, well, what happens if we start to do that in these small doses, right? This pain pop up? Do we start to see issues? What is your cadence? Right? And so now we're going to get more specific towards tasks at hand. And I think that's really how you bridge some of these things, like these BS rules we make around moving in the clinic, and how do we get you out of the clinic and into the real life stuff, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I'm always interested in what does a norm mean, right? Like when we say like the classic 20 heel raise test or, a return to sport test. And, looking at the data across the board, this return to sport is, I think, it's still a big question mark, because you just mentioned like, walking could be your sport. But what if I'm a runner? What if I play basketball? What if I play soccer? What if I do lacrosse and I have heel pain? Like all of those different ideas, movements, sporting events that people are in are going to require different demands. When you or I think other clinicians are kind of scaling back, and it's like, well, we can do a hop test, we can do a T test, we can do the 6-meter jump test, we can do this test, we can do that test. It's like, well, that looked at a range of athletes across the board in multiple sports. So really, would that cross over for us? And I think that's where it gets really, really hard. The thing I wanted to see if you had heard was that there was an updated normative value for a standing heel raise test in healthy adults. And they looked at people all the way from 20 to 80 years old. And being that you and I, Joe, are in our 30s, what do you think the average norm for heel raise for males in their 30s were? And with this new updated literature as of 2017, this was.
My answer is very high and go. I'm going to go with a 12.
And okay, so low numbers were around 12, so you got it. High numbers were up to 50. So an average 50. For about 33 single leg heel raises for males in their 30s was new normative data. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can do that right now.
I mean, I've seen people pass the 20 tests like pretty well. They don't know, right? Like maybe the 30s, but 50. I mean, I've never actually tested people to see just go instantly to see how many you can do. You guys know, I mean, out of all the people that I've worked with, I mean, there's not a lot of people who get to 20. So I'm a little surprised that the numbers are that high. And that's why I went so low with 12, because it just seems to be a lot of people. Maybe it's because we see injured people, right? We see injured people, right? So that affects our perception of the whole population, right?
Correct. And I think pain changes everything, right? But now even, I'll give you some notes, because what we talked about in the previous episode was people with this heel pain are going to probably be around 40 to 60. Right. So if you're in your 40s and you're a male, average heel raise test be about 28. If you're female, 24, 25. If you're 50, 23 to 24 for male, 21, 22 for female. If you're 60, that's maybe where the 20 test is a little bit more reliable across the board, because the numbers there are pretty similar for both male and female, around 18, 19. So it seems like the males have a slight advantage in some of this output up until about maybe that 60th decade of life, and then we kind of all flatten out together, which I think is another really important thing to consider, because muscle mass for men as we age is really important to consider, just like bone mass, I think, in females as they age is something really important to consider. But I think this goes back to this idea that if you're over the age of 50, especially, we should be strength training, we should be loading, we should be trying to build as much lean muscle mass going into those later decades of life, because even in healthy people, we're seeing that tail off naturally. So if you're already in pain and heading into that 50th, 60th, 70th decade with a lot less capacity, that's maybe why people are struggling a lot too. But just the thought.
That is interesting. It definitely exceeds, and that's where I think they have normative data, not necessarily normative data, but rules around what we should look for. Especially what I really care about most, right? If I really care if someone can do 20 versus 30, he always is. I don't know, right? What I really like to see, right, is that these are symmetrical side by side, right? So as long as you do 20 on the right, can they also do 20 on the left, or whatever the number is, right? And the single leg hop is, right? Is the distance close together, right? We're seeing there's really not that much of a huge disparity, because if there are, right, does it make sense to really get into should I have somebody go out and really go for a run for a marathon, right? If their single leg hop test is so far off, probably not, right? You probably want to work with some of these little more common things, right, that we can do in the clinic, and then once we hit some benchmarks, say, okay, now it makes more sense to go this route. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think again, it's this idea of all the normative stuff, right? So if I'm evaluating people and they're in pain, even if they're getting 20/20 and their hop is symmetrical, I'm still going to probably want to work on that, because maybe the numbers I'm holding them accountable to still aren't enough for the sport that they need to get back to, right? And I think that's where that individualization is really so important. And maybe why I've been thinking about that even a little bit more is I did take a dynamometer course. I don't know if I told you about that a few weeks ago. And what I found really interesting with this force output testing was that your torque to body weight ratio is a really important thing. So when we're doing, handheld tests on a table, or I'm looking at someone do 20 heel raises or 30 heel raises or whatever, okay, great. I mean, is that testing strength? Is that more testing endurance? Is that testing, just tolerance to the activity before pain comes on? So I think it becomes harder to qualify a lot of the tests that we do because I can quantify anything. But what, I learned at the course, which was great, and I can always, send a link for, more information on that, was just the ability to calculate torque and bringing that into the clinic over the last few weeks, right? When I'm strength testing people, just to, give them a good clear, like thumbs up, thumbs down. When I put them on the torque testing, it's so different from the like numbers or the conversations we were going to have. And it's just started kind of streamlining the conversation of, hey, look, I know you want to get stronger, but here's the 2 or 3 things I'd focus on. Let's hammer these out for like 6 or 8 weeks and then come back and retest this stuff. And even then, the point they made was, look, the normative data is all over the place. I don't really know what normative data is, but I like what you're saying. Well, what's acceptable asymmetry and what's unacceptable asymmetry? So when you're looking for those differences side to side, be it a hop test, a heel raise test, do you have a certain cutoff in your mind?
I don't know, and maybe I don't know. Like I think ACL protocols are probably the most systematic of
Sure.
all the protocols out there. So maybe there's stuff that you can kind of glean from that. But I mean, like if I was to create like a percentage, I mean, I would like them ideally to be like 95%, like there, right? Like
Yeah.
pretty close. I don't need it to be perfect. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't be doing other things like returning, like doing the activities that they enjoy more. And kind of working back there if they're at 85%. It just depends really on like presentation, how they can, how much pain they have, what they can tolerate. I think there's a lot of factors that play into it, and you can't just base it off these percentages in these tests. It's impossible. And there's 2 things. One specifically what you said, I love, like, we can quantify anything, but we can't. But can we actually like qualify it and put actual meaning behind it? Those are 2 very, very important. So I really like that. The other thing that I wanted to, that I think is important to just mention in general is just because someone can do something doesn't mean that there will be absence of pain. Like, I mean, when we look at all these bodies and research, right, where it's like, there's nothing underlying. MRIs, X-rays, all that stuff is good, but you still have pain, right? But why is that the case? Someone can have perfect mobility, someone can have perfect strength, and someone can still have pain, right? Like, so we can't just like go into the heel raise test. Like, I'm just going to go back to it because we were talking about it. If someone's able to do 20 reps, and maybe they had pain during it, or maybe they didn't have pain during it, it doesn't mean that they're not going to have pain on a daily basis for whatever it is. I think that pain goes beyond logic in a sense, right? So how then do we help that population of people where movement looks good, strength looks good, and what can we do to start to calm down the system and then figure out how we can kind of load them again to create an environment that's going to at least make things more comfortable for them? Because now if we're really talking about like chronic pain where movement looks good, well, I think we're having a whole different conversation. I think that's kind of, we've talked about it before. I don't know if that one episode or not, but how we start to kind of like figure out how we, with chronic pain, like calming down the system and creating like, it's a definitely a different plan. You can't really base it around these generalities at that point. So I kind of want to talk about your Dawson, and I think that we can take it home.
Yeah, well, I think your the limb symmetry index, right? I think probably I picked up on Brew, FMS, SFMA, things like that. Because return to sport testing when we came out of school, right? I think was like, hey, as long as you're within 80% of the other limb, your range of motion is full. There's no joint effusion or swelling. You can start going back. But that 80% number was, I think, hurting a lot of people because it was just too much of a gap. in terms of capacity. So I think for me, I'll lean to the 10% rule. I think for most people, like I don't believe that you need to be perfectly symmetrical, or I don't even know if that's actually an attainable goal.
Sure.
And when I always bring this up for the lower extremity, people are always really worried about the one glute and the one toe that doesn't do something, and the quad that's a little bit weaker. And then I just ask them to pause and say, okay, well, are you thinking about all those things with your upper body, right? What hand are you dominant in? Right or left? It doesn't matter. Let's say you're dominant with your right hand, like I think 80 or 80+% of us are. I write with my right hand. I can't write with my left hand. That is an asymmetry. I'm not going home and chasing that asymmetry, learning how to write with my left hand. I can throw with my right, barely. I can't throw with my left at all. So why am I not going home then and trying to become, ambidextrous and clean up all these, top asymmetries that just seemingly it is what it is? And then I'm going to be sort of like really focused or compulsive about them in the lower body. So I think that 10% cutoff for me is a good starting point for people. Like, hey, let's make sure you're at least within this range. If I'm with an athlete, I'm going to probably hold them more accountable to that 5%. Right. And that's where, I think context matters, and being a little bit more nitpicky with people who have specific goals, rather than, hey, I want to be a little bit more pain-free. Hey, I want to be able to enjoy walks, hikes, time with my family, and things like that. So I definitely, agree with that, sort of synopsis there. But I think it just goes back to the idea that, yeah, we have lots of, data and different ideas, but I think for me, what I probably tell most people with plantar fascia issues, and maybe what I've been telling just most people in general, is I think your best treatment is going to be load management and progression, right? And and I know we're talking about the treatment stuff right now, but and if that doesn't work, heel cups are okay. Like having some soft cushion on the heel for a little bit of time, if again that helps you walk and that helps you move, that's awesome. Injections get a little bit tricky. From the data I've seen, a single cortisone injection doesn't seem to be too dangerous. Maybe you can try it if your quality of life is really, really down. But I think the load management idea and the education that, this is going to take a while with a lot of plantar fascia or white connective tissue injuries, I think is also very important for people to understand. And that we just did an episode on that came out. It came out this week, right? About how long this process takes. And if you're not prepared for that as a clinician, if you're not prepared for that as a client, well, then, 6 or 8 weeks later, you're going to become more frustrated, right? And you're going to be like, well, what the hell's going on? Why am I not getting better? And it's like, well, because it hasn't been 6, 8 months. Or for some people, it hasn't been a year or more, going through this journey. So I think like in terms of treatments, again, we could probably talk another hour about all the things that we like to do. But if we're going to kind of keep it broad and pretty general today, and I know we got a tangent on strength there, which I thought was important, I would say those are probably like my big 3 pieces. And then, honing in on individualized assessments as we find them with the things that we were mentioning before.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think, and just one little point on what you said, I think that the PT industry, the chiros and all that, right? Like we've swung so far away from like the surgeries, the shots, the orthotics, right? Like these things that can potentially really help somebody, and like no, we have the answers, right? Because conservative care really can help, and I think that at some point, right, if these aren't changing, aren't progressing, so we've been really, really struggling, that those conversations should be had with people. I mean, that's a whole other conversation for another episode. But I do think it's kind of a little bit important to highlight there that we shouldn't be shaming people for having conversations with their bodies, because at some point in time, right, you should be referring out and letting them get the imaging that then maybe needed to rule things out that we can be missing with our eyes, with our hands, in our environment. So I think that's important as well. Any last points here, Andrew? What?
No, I mean, I think you summed it up really well right there. Listening to you talk, I was reminded of a quote from Eric Mira, where if it's in your clinical skill set, right, and you can alleviate someone's pain, just do it. I mean, just do it. If that's an orthotic, if that could potentially be an injection and they haven't had one before, if they're a single mother of 3 kids working 2 jobs and they cannot commit to a gym membership and a strength-based program, like, please give people options, okay? Even if you don't love them, there are options. And to your point, even if the efficacy or effectiveness is, well, it's no much better than usual care or there's not really much difference. Okay, but there were still people who got better from those treatments, right? It wasn't just across the board where no one benefited from. So I think that that's a really valuable thing that you brought up to close it out and keep that in mind, because we're so the concept of pain being multifactorial and complex and not only a tissue-based thing, I think pushes us or a lot of clinicians away from just trying to help people feel better while we're trying to help them get better. Don't hesitate to feel better. And if you're a client and you find something that makes you feel better, don't feel ashamed doing it. Do it more, and then pair it with something that you want to try to get better at, be it walking or heel raising or holding an isometric or doing toe yoga, whatever it is that you and your kind of clinician come up to terms on. But I think that was a great closing point, Joe.
Well, I thank you, and same to you. I think there's just some great points there as far as it's just the topic in general. I think PTs we kind of play the hero card a lot. Like, oh, I have to do all this stuff to help them, right? And sometimes the best thing to help that person is just to refer them out. That's why I think understanding their history, what's kind of going on, or really getting to kind of like know how whatever's happening is really affecting their lives, and just not just beyond like pain, right? Like, how is it impacting your relationships, your function? How much time do you have to devote to all this stuff? Like, all that stuff really matters when you're trying to come up with a plan for somebody. Again, this is a conversation that we can dive into probably for another 7 hours from here.
And hopefully next week we'll get Courtney Conley on, and we'll round out some foot talk with her and her experiences. So this will be a nice few week segment I think we got going on.
No, definitely. Well, Joey, I love you. It's a great conversation
I love
today.
you.
Listeners, love you as well. And if you made it this far in the episode, extra love for you as well. And we'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.